Oh my gosh. Isn't this great? Look at this crowd. I think we can safely say that thanks to you, the American campus is no longer a place where the progressive sheep can graze unmolested. Hey, aren't we glad not to be living in Hillary's America? You know, just today, watching the tax reform vote. Can you hear me okay? Just today, watching the tax reform vote. I tend not to watch the votes. I watch the faces of the media as these votes go through. And I take such unnatural glee in their constipated expressions. And then I listen to what they say. Oh, the Republican Party is throwing away its majority next year. Think to myself, if you really thought that, you'd support tax reform, because you want the Republican Party to lose its majority. So we're in an era when we have to learn to decode what we see in the public arena. Right now, we're very lucky to have a decoder-in-chief, Donald Trump. The most unlikely, wild man, out there guy, certainly in American politics in probably a century. And here is Trump. You know, I'm a creature of the Reagan Revolution. I became a... And sometimes I compare Trump and Reagan. Reagan was a man of priorities. Reagan believed that you can't change the world in 30 ways. You can change the world in 2, maybe 3 ways. And so Reagan would focus laser-like on the Soviet Union, on privatization, taxes. And that was pretty much it. He kind of let the rest of it go. This is not Trump. Trump fights on every front. I mean, this guy is pulling us out of the trade pact. He's saving the Supreme Court. He's doing tax reform. He's trying to repeal Obamacare. And in the middle of it, he finds time to swat Meryl Streep and take on Saturday Night Live and the losers at CNN. So what's Trump doing? What he's really doing is, I think he recognizes intuitively that we're not just in a political fight, we're also in a culture fight. And you have to engage at both levels. What Trump is up against, I mean, since his election, we have seen a torrential force of opposition mounted against him. And this opposition revolves around 2 huge lies, 2 big lies. And I want to say a word about these because these are very relevant to the college campus. In fact, although these lies are promulgated by Hollywood, the entertainment industry, the media, the lies are actually concocted in academia. Academia is the laboratory where big lies are generated. Now, big lies are not the same thing as fake news. Fake news is the sort of retail lie. Benghazi was due to a video. That's kind of a small lie. You want to keep your doctor, you can. That's also a small lie. Hitler makes the point that the big lie is actually easier to sell than the small lie because you can't check it out against everyday experience. It's a lie so big, you have trouble getting your head around it. And the 2 big lies that we've been subjected to now in our time are, 1, that racism is a phenomenon of the right, Trump's a racist. The Republican Party is the party of white supremacy. And 2, fascism is a phenomenon of the right. And the idea here is that Trump is not just a racist, he's also a fascist. He has the features of fascism, authoritarianism, ultranationalism, and so on. Now, these lies are the lies that you live with in academia. And like I say, they were minted there. They long predate Trump. The idea, for example, that fascism is a phenomenon of the right was actually formulated by the progressives starting in 1945, when American troops went into the concentration camps and those ghostly, emaciated, starving figures came tumbling out, and fascism and Nazism became morally discredited permanently. The progressives coming into power in academia, the media, and Hollywood in America, who knew that fascism was deeply tied in with the left. It was recognized to be on the left not only by the fascists, but by the anti-fascists. Everybody knew fascism was on the left. FDR knew that. That's why FDR, who admired Mussolini, by the way, sent members of his brain trust to fascist Italy because he saw Italian fascism as more progressive than the New Deal. He wanted to bring some of those ideas to America. Mussolini, for his part, revered FDR. It was a mutual admiration society. Mussolini reviews FDR's book in an Italian magazine, basically goes, he's a great guy. He's one of us. He's a fascist. Now, after the war, all of this became profoundly embarrassing. In fact, not only was the American progressive left and the Democratic Party in bed with Italian fascism, but Hitler got some of his most destructive genocidal schemes from American progressives and from the Democratic Party. And I want to mention just one. In 1935, the leading Nazis who drafted the Nuremberg laws, these are the laws that made Jews into second-class citizens, got together to draft these laws, and they thought that they were having a very momentous occasion because they were creating the world's first racist state. They had a stenographer present to record this historic event. And then one of the Nazis, who had studied in America, basically raised his hand sheepishly and said, sorry guys, we Nazis can't create the world's first racist state because the Democratic Party has already done this in America. The Jim Crow, everything that we want to do to the Jews, the Democrats have already done to African Americans, to blacks. We want to segregate the Jews into ghettos. The Democrats already have segregation laws in place in a whole bunch of American states. We want to outlaw intermarriage or miscegenation. The Democrats have already come up with the one-drop rule. We want state-sponsored discrimination against Jews. The Democrats already have that. Now, in a very interesting moment in this meeting, the Nazis raised a fascinating question: who is a Jew? Because after all, Jews had intermarried with Germans, with Christians over many centuries, and the Nuremberg laws had to define Jewishness. So the Nazi who studied in America goes, why don't we do what the Democrats do? By and large in America, they have the one-drop rule. If you have one drop of black blood, you're black. And the remarkable thing is the Nazis looked at each other and they go, whoa. In other words, the policies of the American Democratic Party were too racist for them. They weren't willing to go that far. Now, I mention all this because it's really amazing that all of this stuff has been swept under the rug. You won't find it in your textbooks. You won't find your professors talking about it. And this is true not just of fascism, but it's equally true of racism. In my last film, Hillary's America, I tried to show definitively that the Democratic Party, the very party that tries to exploit the race card, the very party that points the finger at us, This is the party that promoted for 50 years slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, racial terrorism, the Ku Klux Klan. This is the party that tried to block the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65 and the Fair Housing Bill of '68. And when you say all this, the left kind of backs up, and you get something like this. Well, Dinesh, you're telling us some very disturbing things, and this is all very simplistic because you're not acknowledging that there's plenty of blame to go around. Now, I wanted to counter this, and so in the movie I made a statement. I said that in 1860, which is the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. Not no Republican leader owned a slave, but no Republican in the United States owned a slave. All the slaves in the country at that time, 4 million, the largest slave population in American history, every single one of those 4 million slaves was owned by a Democrat. Now, the beauty of this kind of a statement is, if you think about it, it's a scientific statement in the sense that it's refutable, right? All you have to do is give me a list of 5 Republicans who own slaves, and I would have to take it back. But to this day, no one has been able to give a single valid counterexample. One researcher sent me an email about 6 months ago saying, Dinesh, I think I gotcha. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave on his wife's side. And I replied and said, you kind of almost got me, because while that's true, when this occurred, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. Later, he became a Republican. Now, all of this is worth learning and knowing because it forms part of that intellectual arsenal that you need to be armed with to become a very dangerous person on the American campus. That is actually your mission. And it's a difficult mission. Many years ago, William F. Buckley came to my alma mater, Dartmouth, and raised in a speech that he gave, that I remember to this day, he asked this question: how can you be a conservative in a liberal society? In other words, the normal task of a conservative is to conserve, to preserve what's there. But what if you are in an environment where what's there is actually hostile to you? The whole regnant orthodoxy is mobilized against you. Then what do? You conserve that? You conserve liberalism? No. So Buckley's point was that in this unique situation, which is, by the way, a situation we face not just on the campus, but now even in the country, where you've got these powerful megaphones of academia, the media, Hollywood, blasting Trump, blasting us every single day, how do we as conservatives respond? I think this is the heart of the dilemma of the Republican Party, because many Republicans still want to live in the Reagan era, which was an era of gentlemen's politics. It was an era in which you could envision Reagan and Tip O'Neill having a big argument, but then going out to have a Guinness afterward. They didn't actually do that, but you could envision them doing it. But that is not the America we live in now. That is not the campus that you inhabit today. The truth of it is, if you want to be effective, and I mean really effective, not just to create a kind of island of freedom in a sea of repression. I'm talking about turning the whole apple cart upside down, shaking the place up, disturbing the embedded assumptions that are on the campus. Well, in that case, Buckley says, and I agree, you can't continue to be a conservative in the old way. In other words, you have to be philosophically conservative, yes, but temperamentally, strategically, tactically, you have to now be more radical. And by more radical, I mean you have to be something of a guerrilla. Your job is ultimately to turn things upside down, to turn assumptions into questions, to shake the complacency of the campus. And you have to think of creative and sometimes even crazy ways to do that. When I think back to my own campus years, we did some crazy stuff. I was part of a renegade right-wing paper called the Dartmouth Review. And we used to tell the deans that taking on our paper was kind of like wrestling with a pig, because not only did it get everyone dirty, but the pig liked it. And the job of your job on the campus is to challenge these entrenched orthodoxies and overturn them. And you have to think of ways that you can do that. You're uniquely poised to do it. And you know, in American history, when I think about the long sweep of it, normally in American history, we can afford to be kind of complacent. Most of the time, it's kind of like living in a house where you don't need to consult the blueprints of the house. You just live in the house. You just walk in the hallway, sit on the couch. But it's only when the house really begins to shake that you begin to say, oh, I better get up in the attic. I better check out those blueprints. So we are living at such a time when you need to know the blueprints of the American Revolution. Why? Because that's what you're conserving. As conservatives, we are conserving the ideals of the American Revolution. And that makes us conservatives, but it also makes us revolutionaries. Yes. So the left has the race card, and the reason they keep playing it is because it works for them. You can't say things like, let's return to civility, stop playing the race card. The reason they do it is it works. And the reason that these cards work for them isn't just because of the man on the street. The most dangerous fascists in America are not Antifa. Antifa? I mean, look at these guys. They've crawled out of Bernie's basement. They put on their black costume. They don't have a car, so they have to find their bike lock. But the most dangerous fascists at Berkeley are not Antifa. The most dangerous fascist at Berkeley is the mayor of Berkeley, who calls off the cops. The most dangerous fascists in America are the Hollywood bosses who will destroy your career if you run athwart their beliefs, or academic deans who control billion-dollar endowments, or companies like Google that will put you out on the street if you write a memo protesting their diversity seminar. The most dangerous fascists in America are the ones who use the powers of the state, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, the Justice Department, the SWAT teams, even of the Bureau of Land Management, against their political adversaries. So there is a fascism of our time, but it is coming now, as it always was, from the left. Fascism has always been a phenomenon of the left. Are we up to the challenge? Yes. I want to leave by saying to you that it is with a lot of confidence that the ideals of the Reagan generation are now transmitted to you, the Trump generation. The world is different and the fight is different, but the cause endures, the ideals are the same, and in those words of the 1960s, if not now, when? And if not us, who? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Delighted to answer some questions, and I believe we have mics set up for it. Go ahead.
Hey there, my name's Stephen Burns. I'm Vice President of Kennesaw State University's chapter. I'm a RA, which is a resident assistant on campus, and we have often, our role has shifted from just making sure our residents aren't drinking when they shouldn't be or doing things like that. We've noticed that there are policies now where they're telling me to write up students for saying words like retarded or queer, or they want us to explain to our residents what white privilege is and things like that. I've set principles in to where I'm not doing that to my residents, but as a faculty of the university almost, how do I combat this cultural Marxism that is being pushed on my residents?
So the question is, how do we fight this attempt to not only declare the need for conformity, but to enforce it through the mechanisms of the RAs, the professors, the grading system, the whole mechanism of the campus? And frankly, this is not that easy to do because as students, you're vulnerable. You're at the receiving end. You come and go, the professors stay. And what you're being subjected to isn't just political correctness is a very mild term for it. The Nazis actually had a better term, which they call Gleichschaltung, which basically means coordination, which is making the whole society march in lockstep. So this is actually the objective of the left. They're starting with the campus because the campus is a more regimented society than the larger society. But as you know, they're trying to enforce this Gleichschaltung across the board through the corporate sector, where if you dissent, you lose your job. And so this is actually something that we have to think of. We have to fight with all possible mechanisms that we can. We can fight it through legal mechanisms, with groups filing lawsuits to enforce free speech on the campus. We can fight it through political tactics run by students on the campus. If you're at a private university and you can mobilize alumni to support your cause, you should do that. In other words, to use financial leverage against the colleges. Public humiliation of professors on social media is my favorite weapon. The important thing to realize is that the left in these areas is completely unscrupulous. I'll give you a small example that comes from Alinsky, and Alinsky is actually boasting about it. Alinsky said that in the 60s, when a Republican was speaking on a campus, a bunch of leftists came to him and said, "We want to protest this Republican speaker. We want to hold up signs saying that we think he's like the Ku Klux Klan, and we want to expose him as a kind of white supremacist." And Alinsky said, "Don't do that. That's stupid." Alinsky said, "If you really want to embarrass this guy, all of you go get white sheets. Dress up like Ku Klux Klansmen. Come to the talk, and every time this guy opens his mouth, jump up and down, cheer wildly, and applaud. And this is what will be picked up in the media. This will totally embarrass this guy. He will never show his face in public again." So this is how the other side thinks. And I guess what I'm saying is, we are sitting ducks. We are the wildebeest on the Nature Channel. If we don't realize that this is kind of what we're up against, people who use not only force but deceit. And we've got to be ready for it and be ready to expose it and to fight it every way we can. Okay?
Hi, Dinesh. Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Obviously, you talk a lot about fascism and how it's affecting America. Our neighbors to the north, as you may know, have imposed some new laws and regulations on speech. More specifically, the bill that I believe passed recently to outlaw Islamophobia in Canada. Do you believe that this might come to America soon? And if so, how can we fight this legislation from passing?
So the question is about outlawing Islamophobia. And I want to pause for a moment and just watch the operation of what is going on here from the point of view of the left. The first thing that they've done is they have taken criticism of a thing and converted it into fear of the thing. In other words, somebody who doesn't like democracy is not a democracy phobe. He's a critic of democracy. But the point of medicalizing it, Islamophobia, is so that you can diagnose it as an ailment to be treated. In other words, not to be argued with. It's not a position to be debated. It is a malady to be treated. The person holding these views is basically nuts. Okay? So in merely establishing the word Islamophobia, that's their first victory. Because they've created a term, a kind of a nonsense term, but a term that ends all debate and defines you, the critic of Islam, as a bad guy, and in fact, in need of medical attention. Everything that they do after that is merely a cleanup. Because if you're in need of medical attention, now it's just a matter, should we incarcerate the guy? Should we send him to forced psychiatric care? Should we have speech codes? But they've already kind of won once that word is firmly established, because it has already described the condition that they're fighting. The same with hate speech. The moment that they can take a debate on affirmative action and make it hate speech, essentially what they're saying is, we now have the right to shut down the debate. Because we're not listening to arguments, we're listening to hate. Now, what I'm getting at is that they've been doing this for a long time. And they're just very clever at it. Our first step is to recognize what they're doing and then think of ways to blow it up. The reason Trump, to me, is so effective, people go, oh, Trump's out there, Trump's Twitter, take away his Twitter. All these Republicans, take away Trump's Twitter. I'm like, and do what? Give it to you? What would you do with it? You wouldn't even know what to do with it. What Trump is doing in his own way is kind of blowing up the entrenched guardrails that have been set up to police American politics. Those guardrails were not set up by us. They have been set up by our opponents to control us. And the same thing goes on the campus. Essentially, there's a sort of a wall, and all of us are asked to walk in the middle. You have to figure out a way to take that wall down. And that is your supreme challenge, ultimately, as conservatives. Okay? All right.
In your book, Letters to a Young Conservative, you spoke a little bit about the parallels between slavery and abortion. Could you talk about that a little bit?
The question is about slavery and abortion, and it is true that sometimes the analogy between the two is belabored and can then be caricatured. But the truth of it is that if you read the Lincoln-Douglas debates between Lincoln and Douglas, and they're debating the issue of the extension of slavery into the territories, very interestingly, Douglas argues as follows. He says, listen, I'm not saying that I'm for slavery or against it. He goes, I'm just saying that we live in a big country where people have all kinds of views on the subject. And we've got to agree to disagree. And the way to agree to disagree, ultimately, is to affirm the principle of choice. And so he says, well, when it comes to slavery, we should let each community, let's say each territory, arguably each state, decide for itself if it wants to have slavery, yes or no. And in doing this, Douglas says, we are doing nothing more than accepting the reality that people disagree profoundly about whether or not slavery is good or bad. And we are not trying to referee that debate. We're submitting it to the democratic process and to freedom itself, to choice. So this sounds like an unbelievably libertarian and democratic argument. And Lincoln recognized immediately its cunning power. Now, if you watch the argument carefully, you will see that not only in substance, but almost in form, it is identical to the so-called pro-choice argument. It is identical in this sense that while Douglas is talking not about the individuals choosing, but a community choosing, in both cases he's invoking choice as a way to settle the difference of opinion. Now, it's worth listening to Abraham Lincoln's answer to this, not only because he's the founder of the Republican Party, but because it actually gives you the strongest pro-life argument that exists. And Lincoln basically says, look, yes, we have to respect the principle of choice, but we can never discuss choice without considering what is being chosen. So Lincoln says that what we are choosing in this case is the question of whether or not to enslave another guy. In other words, we're using choice to cancel out some other guy's choice. And in fact, we're canceling out all his choices because slavery is not only a piracy of property and labor, but you're stealing ultimately a man's freedom and in some sense his life itself. So the pro-life argument is identical to that. It essentially argues, look, of course people should have choice, but choice can never be indifferent to the content of the choice. And so when we look at the debates of the 1850s, they are eerily similar to the debates that we have today on the abortion issue. And a study of those debates, if you want to be an intelligent advocate for the pro-life cause, you could do far worse than to study those debates. Okay.
This will be the last question.
Hey, Dinesh. In your movie, Hillary's America, you kind of talked about it today. You talk about the idea of the racial history rooted in the Democratic Party. And then there's this idea that a big switch happened when LBJ signed that Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. Can you talk about why that's false? I know you talked about it in your movie. Just a little bit refreshment would be great.
The question is about the, well, Democrats don't like to talk about their history. They've never admitted it. They've never apologized for it. They've never paid 1 penny in restitution for it. But if you force them, they will admit that all the vicious deeds of American history, virtually every leader of the Ku Klux Klan was a Democrat. Every segregation law in the South, there's no exception, was passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor. All the bad guys of the civil rights movement, Sheriff Bull Connor, the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, who blocked black kids from getting to school, every single one of these guys is a Democrat. So up against the wall, the Democrat will say, yeah, it's all true. But then they pull out their last escape hatch, and the escape hatch is the idea that sometime in the 60s, because of race, the two parties switched sides. You can almost say they exchanged platforms. The Republicans became Democrats, the Democrats became Republicans. Another way to put it is the racist Democrats essentially now joined the Republican Party. And this notion of the big switch, although completely fallacious, does have two facts that seem to be going for it. One, blacks who used to be Republican did in fact become Democrats. And the South, which was almost 100% Democratic, has become largely Republican. So it does appear on the surface that there has been this switch. But when you look a little more closely, this whole thing falls apart. The switch of blacks to the Democratic Party actually occurred in the 1930s. In 1936, FDR got 75% of the black vote. Now think about it. At that time, the Democratic Party was the party of segregation and the Ku Klux Klan. In short, blacks didn't actually switch because of race. They switched because of something else. And what was that something else? Essentially, it was the benefits of the New Deal. Remember that this was in the horrible aftermath of the Depression. Blacks were hit particularly hard by the Depression. Although FDR's New Deal policies were racist, they were segregated, they gave only crumbs to the African American community. But nevertheless, that's the reason for the black switch. Now, the switch of the South is a little more complex. And the switch of the South has actually been occurring for 50 years, actually more than that, almost 70 years now. It began in the 1950s. Eisenhower won a whole bunch of southern states. Now, people say, Richard Nixon, Tricky Dick. engaged in a racist Southern strategy to appeal to Southern racist Democrats to become Republicans. The remarkable thing about this is that the people who say this have never been able to give a single example of a public racist statement that Richard Nixon ever made. If you're going to make a racist appeal, you got to say racist stuff. Now, Nixon, to be honest, was kind of a racist in private. If you listen to the Watergate tapes, Nixon hates everybody. He hates Jews. He hates Italians. He hates the Irish. He hates Ivy Leaguers. He's a bundle of prejudices, but in public, Nixon was Machiavellian, extremely precise, very careful about what he said. So the truth of it is, Nixon did not make this Southern racist appeal, nor did he actually win the South. The Deep South went for George Wallace, a Democrat. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That's George Wallace. What Nixon did win was the Upper South. Now, this is actually very interesting because what was happening is the South has undergone a massive transition from being a rural, agricultural, sharecropping, plantation society to becoming more urban, more cosmopolitan, more industrial. And so it was the southern cities like Raleigh, also going on to Phoenix, Dallas. Nixon realized that he was not going to win the Deep South, and he didn't try to win it, but he peeled off the Upper South, the non-racist South. So this is a good way to summarize it. From the 1950s to the present, if you look at survey data, the South essentially becomes decreasingly racist. As racism in the South declines dramatically, the South becomes more and more Republican. So the lines of racism and republicanism run in opposite directions. As the racism goes down, Southern republicanism moves up. And very tellingly, of all the Dixiecrats, the so-called racist Democrats, the breakaway racist wing of the Democratic Party, only one guy became a Republican, Strom Thurmond. All the other racist Dixiecrats stayed in the Democratic Party. Like Robert Byrd, they stayed, they remained Democrats, they were lionized as Democrats until their death. Hillary called Robert Byrd her mentor, the conscience of the Senate. So this is the actual history, and I just want to emphasize that in an era where the left uses these weapons against us all the time, having this knowledge is actually very potent. It allows you to be able to hit back, not in the old style, hey, I'm not as racist as you might think. Hey, some of my best friends are black. Hey, I'm not really a fascist even though I'm a right-winger. No. You hit back by saying, racism? Really? You're the guys who did it. You're the people you're the ones who did the lynching. All those Confederate statues, those are your guys. So this kind of knowledge makes you a force to be reckoned with on the campus. Remember, people are entitled to their own opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And by having facts, not just being able to take down fake news, if you can take down fake scholarship, fake history, fake narratives, the story behind the story, I call it the meta story, that's ultimately what is driving American politics. If we take away the race card and we take away the fascism card, the left doesn't have any cards left. That's ultimately how we win. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
'Cause I'm gonna make this place yours.